Welcome to the Chairman's Perspective Podcast. Chairman.
You are listening to the Chairman's Perspective, and I am your host, Van Turner Jr., and I'm here with my co-host, a prolific journalist himself, Lee Eric Smith of the New Tri-State Defender. Lee, what about it?
Mr. Chairman, you are far too kind, and wow, have we got an amazing show for you today. Get your popcorn ready, unless you're driving, of course. Don't get popcorn then. But the show today, we have our special guest, none other than the mayor of Shelby County, Mr. Lee Harris. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of Shelby County. We're going to get into juvenile justice here in the county, including all of the talk about the new juvenile justice facility. And we're going to crunch some numbers talking about the upcoming budget season. So a lot of show to get to, not a lot of time, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. And we'll be right back with Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris on the Chairman's Perspective right here on the Kazukian Network.
The Chairman's Perspective on the Kazukian Network.
Kazukian! I'm Cynthia Daniels, host of Grind Set. Are you looking to start a business? Do you need tips on how to scale up? Get it on Grind Set. On this show, our guests will keep you listening. What's your Grind Set? If you happen to miss some of our episodes, make sure you check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast provider.
Grind Set on the Kazukian Network.
Kazukian! The Chairman's Perspective on the Kazukian Network.
As promised, we are back here on the Chairman's Perspective, and I am Van Turner Jr. sitting here next to my co-host, Lee Eric Smith, and we've got the great mayor of Shelby County, Tennessee, Lee Harris, in the studio. And Mayor, why don't you give us a quick rundown of the recent State of the County address that you just gave?
So great question. I'm so pleased and glad to be here. We talked about the county. Shelby County is a terrific place. It's the largest county in the state of Tennessee. It's one of the most diverse counties in the state of Tennessee and in America. 7 great municipalities: Arlington, Bartlett, Collierville, Memphis, Millington, Lakeland, and Germantown. 950,000 people in our county. We just talked about how proud I am to be in the mayor's office in the county, the 6th elected mayor of Shelby County. So proud to be here, proud to work with the county commission. Had a very productive relationship with the county commission since I've been in office, and talked about some of the things we've accomplished so far and, kind of the path forward for the future.
And Mayor Harris, there are some that would say that it was just time for a swing in a different direction. Previous administration was, we'll just say, conservative. And some feel like maybe it's time for a more progressive kind of agenda. Do you kind of see the pendulum swinging that way? And what are you finding out now that you're in office?
I think the pendulum has definitely swung. I think people realize that we've got to do something about the inequality in this community. We've got to do something about the least of these. As I said before, we're really proud that our county is so large and diverse with 950,000 citizens, but about 200,000 of our citizens live in poverty. And so that's a significant number of people that live below the poverty line. And we've got to do as best we can to bend local government to their needs. And I think people are ready for that. I think that kind of perspective, that vision is really associated most often with progressives. And so I think they're ready for somebody to talk about that. And so that's what we've talked about, is how we can make sure that local government is broadly responsive to the needs of those who need a little help. The 200,000 folks that live below the poverty line that are looking for more opportunities. So we've been talking about things like a living wage. That's been something that the county commission has been leading on for a long time and continues to lead on, and we've been talking about how to execute on that and make sure that as many people as possible in our community make at least $15 an hour. So that's really important. That's just one of many issues that we've already been able to have a conversation with the community about, and that we intend to keep working on.
That's great. That's great. So, Mayor, let me track this back. So you've gone from being a legislator twice. You were a city councilman, and then you were a senator, and you were head of the Democratic senators in Nashville. And so in that role, you were a legislator, but also the Republicans had supermajorities in both houses of the General Assembly, both the state rep and the state senate. And now that has changed, and it's totally turned around now. Now you are an executive, no longer a legislator. And the Democrats are in charge locally. There are 8 Democrats who are legislators. You are a Democratic mayor. And so there's been a total change. And just tell us a little bit about that. You've gone from being a legislator to now an executive, gone from a supermajority Republican General Assembly to now a majority Democratic legislative branch. What are your thoughts?
So there are a lot of differences and a lot of things that are the same. So I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is, like you said, I started on the city council and I moved to the state senate. Now I'm back in local government. So that's really interesting to me that I'm back in local government. But I can tell you that I really prefer local government local government on the county side to local government in City Hall. Again, this is just my own personal experience, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds for your listeners. But City Hall, to me, is like constantly drinking water out of a fire hose. There's just so many needs, and City Hall is kind of the place where people go, I'll just be honest, to complain about some of the real need out there. County Commission is in a little bit different spot. Shelby County government is in a little bit different spot. Whether it's true or not, in the minds of most of the community, it's a different kind of local government, and people are pretty well satisfied with the state of affairs in our county and with our county government and with our county commission. And so that's just a different place to be in. When I was on the city council, there's no doubt about it that Memphis had higher wrong track numbers than right track numbers. And the city council's numbers in terms of disapproval were just horrible. So it was not the kind of place, it was just a tough experience. Local government is always tough, and it continues to be tough, but as between the two, I prefer the county for a whole lot of reasons, even though, the city does some things that are really interesting to me, and I miss some of that. But the county, I'm just having a great time on the county side. I think the other part was executive side. Executive is a lot more fun. I enjoyed the legislative side because I learned so much, because you learn how to work with others. You got to, work as a team and so forth. The executive side, those skills are very valuable because executives tend not to be team players. And so I feel like I'm much more of a team player because I come out of that legislative side. That's probably also the same thing that's true with Jim Strickland, is, he was a city council member. And so when you start there, it's hard not to want to work with others because that's kind of what you know. So that, it was a good training ground, but the executive is much funner because, you can get some things done just, being pretty straightforward. So, we have meetings like that every day, and it always reminds me, we can just say it, and somebody will probably try to make it happen, and that's always good.
You're listening to The Chairman's Perspective, powered by Kazukian. Mayor, I had a question for you in this form. Namely, we hear a lot about the divide between, conservatives and progressives, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm wondering if you're having a challenge, kind of making the case for a progressive agenda to, let's just say, the more conservative parts or the more conservative constituency in Shelby County. Are you running into any pushback? Because a lot of times when you say progressive to a certain demographic, their ears automatically close up.
Right. So progressive to me means that you're going to fight for the most vulnerable, that you're going to try to be broadly impactful, and you're going to try to make sure the least of these get some say in what happens in the community, what happens with respect to local government, and that you're really committed to be a voice for that kind of underserved community. That's what progressive means to me. And I think that at the local level, there's not as much partisan divide as at, let's say, the state level. But even at the state level, it's not as bad as people think. But at the local level, I think people are on the same page in a lot of ways, and I think some of the kind of caricatures could be flipped on their heads. So, for example, at the local level, I think I'm one of the people in this community who's one of the most careful spenders out there. That I am extraordinarily cheap with respect to spending of public resources, and I'm a Democrat. At the same time, I can think about people who are in county government who are Republican who are much more inclined to spend and so forth. So sometimes those labels don't mean a whole lot of things because there's so much agreement at the local level on so many kinds of things we need to do in order to move forward. At the state level, there is a divide, and it changed over time. So I'm in my 8th year in elected office, and for a while, the biggest divides were around abortion and guns. Right now, probably the biggest divide is immigration.
That's great. We have a lot more information, so don't you go anywhere. We'll be right back with the Chairman's Perspective.
The Chairman's Perspective on the Kazukian Network.
Jazz, America's own original musical art form. When did it start? Who were and are some of the major players? How do you distinguish what kind of jazz you're listening to? We talk about the great and lesser-known artists, songs and tunes, the instruments, and the social impact jazz has had on world culture since its beginning at the start of the 20th century.
Riffin' on jazz on the Kazookian Network. Kazookian!
Hey, this is Lee Harris, Mayor of Shelby County, and when I'm listening to the Chairman's Perspective, I always catch them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or right here on the Kazookian Network.
And we're back on the Chairman's Perspective, powered by the Kazookian Network. I'm sitting in the co-pilot seat with our esteemed host, none other than the chairman of the Shelby County Commission, Mr. Van Turner. And honestly, I'm just enjoying this conversation between two of the decision makers, the power brokers in the county, Mayor Lee Harris, who is joining us here on the show, and of course, Mr. Van Turner.
Thank you so much, Lee. Now, before we run out of time, Mayor, let's talk about your approach to the juvenile justice issues which are now facing our community. Could you share with the listeners your thoughts?
My thoughts are it's real tough work, this issue. So we're trying to do a couple things, and I'll try to summarize it. One of the things we're trying to do is detain youth offenders as seldomly as possible. So we're trying to get alternatives for detention when kids commit crimes, particularly low-level crimes. And so we have a lot of options that we have worked on the county commission with and that are in process. For example, as you know, Mr. Chairman, we're going to talk about on Monday the Evening Reporting Center, adding an Evening Reporting Center. And what the Evening Reporting Center says that if there are offenses that make sense, judges shouldn't detain the kid, but instead send the kid to an after-school program that's specifically geared for juvenile offenders. That after-school program, it's not a good name, but the after-school program is known as an Evening Reporting Center because we haven't, changed the name quite yet. And it's just a place we go pick up the kids and bring them to a site. The site we'll be talking about on Monday is a site at a Shelby County school and give them the kind of programming they need so that they don't have to get detained incarcerated in a facility. The other issue is if we have to detain kids, make sure they have rehabilitation programming. So that's educational services and the whole host of programming that they need. We've got about 900 kids that face detention every year in our county. And so we want to make sure those kids, when they get out, feel like they're on the road to rehabilitation. They're not detained for very long, by the way. On average, kids in our county are detained for about 24 days, but that's still long enough. And so we got to make sure that we do right by them while they're in detention.
And now I know that there are some who in the community say that we have to be tough on crime, and no one wants a community just overrun with gang violence and drugs and all of those things. So I know that we have to sort of split the difference with maintaining safe communities, and we have to be sure that we are doing what we can to make sure we cut the crime down in our communities. What ways do you think educators, ministers, and the community can get involved and assist with the efforts that you have going forward with the Juvenile Justice Center?
So these are really, really hard issues. One of the things that I have proposed to the County Commission and they've agreed is that we need to scrap the current facility that we have, which is the detention-only facility, and build a new facility for kids who get caught and detained by the county. And so we're talking about a facility that has places for social services operators and nonprofits and faith-based operators to come in and deliver services for those kids when they are detained. But, Mr. Chairman, I want to be honest, we are talking about building a detention facility for youth offenders. And so it's not hard to cast that in a negative light. To say, for example, that y'all are building a new jail. We have seen those arguments around the country, and we have seen those arguments succeed to stop many, many projects around the country, even though the projects were intended to create more opportunities for rehabilitation for youth offenders. And so what's happened around the country when it comes to juvenile justice is we've got kids in a variety of different urban settings that are in completely abysmal settings where they don't go to class for the required number of hours a day because there is not classroom space where, like in our facility, they don't have access to windows or recreational space or visitation space or medical services or opportunities to visit with their parents, where they don't have a library, where they don't have a place for social services operators to come in. kids that are in just really, really terrible circumstance in facilities that are owned and operated by local government. And so it's a real tough political messaging, problem. And we're navigating it as best we can. We luckily have great partnership out of you and the other county commissioners so far to move forward and see what we can do. We have said that one of the things that we like to see further conversation about in this community is a conversation about not just a new facility and not just a new facility with rehabilitative services, but a new facility that has rehabilitative services and that has a fewer number of beds. So that is smaller, so that fewer kids are detained because there's just not enough beds. That would force, I believe, all kinds of stakeholders to think about even more in terms of alternatives to detention. But this is a real tough area because it's really easy to distort and corrupt the conversation. Even though I'm a progressive and a pretty proven progressive, it's a conversation that's really hard to win. But so far, we've been making a lot of progress. And that's just one of the many things we're working on when it comes to juvenile justice and criminal justice.
You're listening to The Chairman's Perspective, powered by the Kadzukian Network. Mr. Mayor, a lot of times when we hear people talking about, the problems with youth, there seems to be what I would think an oversimplification of, hey, let's come up with more summer programs. The kids get in trouble because they don't have anything to do, which may be true. I don't know if it is or not, but it seems like the issue is a little more complicated than that. What have you learned, both, just in life in general, but specifically in your role as mayor that maybe gives you a different perspective on the nuances of how we deal with our youth?
So in the 8 years that I've been in elected office, I've learned a lot about what government can do and can't do with respect to many of these issues. So, for example, one of the things you hear most often from the community when they think about young folks or even ex-offenders in some cases, they say, well, you got all these young folks running around, just give them all a broom or a lawnmower and get them all to cut some grass, right? Why don't the county just do that, right? And, my answer is because it's county government, right? I don't have anybody in county government, right? 5,600 employees and so forth. We don't have anybody in county government that knows how to manage 16-year-olds for a yard cutting experience. 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds would come to that program expecting people that know how to teach, people that know how to interact with teenagers, know what developmental needs teenagers have. And government is not really equipped, at least local government generally is not really equipped to do that kind of work. So the best we could do to operationalize some of those ideas is to find a partner, right? So for example, even as we sit here today, Mr. Chairman and Lee, I could have a person who's a millennial say to me, well, Mr. Mayor, why don't y'all have a podcast? And I'll say, because I'm in county government. and I don't have, I got 5,600 people
and
that I can call.
Not one of them do podcasts.
Not one of them does podcasts. And so it's hard for people to understand the limitations. And they think that basically what county government can do, what any government can do, City Hall certainly, they think that there is boundless capability and time and resources. And the reality is those things are really, really limited. And there's only a few kinds of things that government is really good at. And again, I'm a progressive, but again, at the local government level, a lot of that stuff gets flipped on its head. So trying to communicate that and really understanding that is something that I think has taken me a while to get to. So I'll tell people in a second, you give me a nonprofit, you give me a church, you give me a faith-based organization that wants to manage some kids over the summer, I'd be glad to bring a proposal to the county commission to make that happen. But the other stuff about, well, why don't y'all train them to manage kids? And I don't have people that can manage kids or train people to manage kids or do any number of these things. They say, why don't you get the ex-felons cutting the yards? What?
Because we're county government.
Because we're county government.
Right.
I don't have a lot more equipment and the ex-felons and putting all that together. I am limited. Call it what you want. I'm limited. The best thing we can do is find people in the community to partner with. And if we can find people in the community to partner with, like, for example, this podcast, then yes, we can get a lot of things done together. But a lot of what needs to be done in our community is really got to be driven by partnership. And it's not Superman. I give speeches all the time. We are not Superman. I'm not here to save the day. I'm only here to do one thing, partner with you. If you do your part, I'll do my part. But that's it. No other promises.
Well, we appreciate it, Mayor. Certainly your love for this community and its people is not limited. And we all know that and we hear that. coming from you. We will be right back on the Chairman's Perspective, powered by the Kazukian Network.
Chairman. The Chairman's Perspective on the Kazukian Network.
R&R on Sports is proud to be on Sirius XM.
So what's R&R stand for?
Real talk and relevant sports issues.
It's racial and relative. We're brothers from the South. We can relate.
R&R on Sports on the Kazukian Network. The Chairman's Perspective podcast on the Kazukian Network.
We are back with the Chairman's Perspective, and I am Chairman Van Turner Jr., and here's my co-host with me, Lee Eric Smith.
Happy to be here.
And we are talking with the mayor of Shelby County. We've just discussed juvenile justice, and we've discussed poverty, and we've also sort of discussed the mayor's state of the county address. Now let's get into the budget. Mr. Mayor, this will be known as your favorite time of the year, budget season. From a fund balance perspective, we are in pretty good shape, and we use those funds, of course, to address needs in our community, like transit, education, juvenile justice, and, of course, poverty. What will you emphasize during this budget season? Where will your priorities lie? What will you push, and what will you cut?
So I think that's a great question. We do a consolidated budget, and there are several countywide elected officials, and so I've got to try as best I can to work with all of them and try to bring a budget that makes sense given the priorities as I understand them, from the county commission and from my own interactions with the community. So one of the things that I know will be in the budget is investments in pre-K, is that the county will grow its investment in pre-K to provide additional classrooms. That everybody seems to be on the same page there. It'll be the first time in many years that we see new investments from Shelby County in pre-K. So that's quite historic. Of course, that builds on what this county commission has already done, which is approve and administer a process to administer a new pre-K program. And so we're going to soon talk more about that, about trying to add new classrooms, and we've got to have somebody facilitate that process of adding new classrooms. So pre-K. Other one is $15 an hour, is that we've got to make sure that more of our local employees make $15 an hour. Of course, everybody in the county makes $15 an hour if they're a county employee. Everybody in the city makes at least $15 an hour if they're a city employee. But we still have a few more public employees that don't make $15 an hour. I'd point the chairman, as I'm sure he already knows, that there are 600 employees who are cafeteria workers for Shelby County Schools. And I'm not trying to demean Shelby County Schools. They're doing really great work, and they have thousands of employees. So the vast majority of their employees are already at a living wage. But we still have 600 workers left who work really hard and work pretty long hours. They're technically part-time, but they work, over 30 hours a week for the most part, and they make between $11 and $14 an hour. And we got to get those people up to $15 an hour. That is a top priority. And I think that there will always be all kinds of excuses and reasons not to act. But I know, because we've had plenty of meetings about this, Mr. Chairman, that you're prepared to take action if the opportunity presents itself. I'm prepared to take action if the opportunity presents itself, so that we can pay those cafeteria workers $15 an hour. Then there's some minor things like, making sure we get the budget delivered in a timely fashion, which we're hoping will be a little bit earlier than last year. And just making sure that we can stay all on the same page, because there's a number of elected officials and most of them are new. And so there is a tendency among new elected officials to expand in their first budget request and try to, get new employees and so forth. If everybody expands, everybody get new employees. Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't have to tell you what that means. Mm-hmm. That means a tax increase. Mm-hmm. And we're trying very hard to say, relax.
Relax on the tax.
Relax on the tax. Let's focus on things that really impact the community, that really improve the public interest. And it's, for me, it's sometimes hard to say new employees, improve the public interest. It depends. If they offer a new service, perhaps. But if there's no new service involved, then I think we need to concentrate on pre-K. I think we need to concentrate on making sure that employees that are not making $15 an hour make $15 an hour.
You're listening to The Chairman's Perspective, powered by Kazukian. Question for both the chairman and the mayor. We've been following closely what's been going on at the Tennessee General Assembly, and I want to get your opinions on whether or not Shelby County is going to get treated right. Sometimes on this end of the state, I don't know, it just feels like they don't like us that much, or they're not that interested in the issues that are happening on this end of the state, and specifically this southwest corner. Mayor, what are your thoughts, and especially as a former legislator yourself, what do you see there relative to policy that's happening here in Shelby County?
Well, I'm pretty hopeful that over time we're going to make a even bigger push at the state level. I think we already get some things out of the state, and I think we're going to try to get even more, at least. And I expect that we're going to tee up some issues that are really important to Shelby County. There are 950,000 people in Shelby County, for example, and between 100 to 150,000 of them don't have a driver's license because they were suspended because of court debt. That's 100 to 150,000 people that have unnecessary run-ins with the law. That's 100 to 150,000 people that end up in the criminal justice system over and over and over and over again. That issue is an issue that is probably one of the most biggest issues holding us back, and that is a state issue because the state authorizes licenses, and state law is what drives policy around licenses. So we'll be making a big push that needs to be the number one issue for the state in the coming years, and I think that we will get an audience, and I think we will see reform. What do I mean? I mean we need state permission to issue more driver's licenses to people so we can stop people from getting pulled over, stop them from having missed court dates, stop them from not being able to get to a job. We're talking 1 in 10 people in our county. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of debt that constantly keeps building for no purpose.
Where does that money go if it's collected? It goes to...
Well, it's not collected, but part of it will go to the state, part of it will go to the county. There are a few fees that are associated with the county too. But, it's not collected because we've had the court says we just had a ruling about this issue. And the court said 93% of the people that don't have a license in our community, 93% of the people cannot afford to pay the debt. That means there's not an option. They are absolutely not going to pay the debt, right? We just had the court case. They said only 7% of people in Memphis and Shelby County can afford to pay their debt and get their license back.
Meanwhile, it puts more stress on the justice system.
On the justice system, they get pulled over and over again. It's a huge issue. The court said it's unconstitutional. So we just had a federal court case that said it is so pervasive that it is unconstitutional.
And I agree with the mayor. I think the thing that I always hear in Nashville is that we have to be on one accord. And I can tell the listeners we are on one accord. We've already had a joint meeting with the city council. We have one planned for this month. We also have a joint meeting planned with the Shelby County School Board. And so when you see the school board working with city council, working with the county commission, the superintendent working with Mayor Harris, working with Mayor Strickland, I think you get the picture. And so Nashville cannot deny a united Shelby County. And I think that's what you're going to see. And I think that when we present that united front to the Tennessee General Assembly, they have to respect what we're saying, and they have to go along with what we're saying because they know that our hearts are in the right place and we're unified behind the message. Yes, we have a new commission for this new budget cycle, but with great commissioners such as Tammy Sawyer, who has great human capital expertise, to Billingsley, Commissioner Billingsley, who has great insight with education, along with Michael Whaley, to even Commissioner Eddie Jones, who has great work with blight remediation. I think that you're going to see really, really positive outcomes for the community during this budget cycle, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to working with Mayor Lee Harris, a great Morehouse man that I may add.
Hear, hear. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
The Morehouse men in the house. No pun intended.
You know it had to be mentioned before it was over. It's important.
That's a whole lot of information we packed in a very short show. We're out of time, but we'll be back after this on the Kadzukian Network. We are The Chairman's Perspective. Hold on.
The Chairman's Perspective podcast on the Kadzukian Network.
R&R on Sports is proud to be on Sirius XM.
So what's R&R stand for?
Real talk and relevant sports issues.
It's racial and relative. We're brothers from the South. We can relate.
R&R on Sports on the Kadzukian Network. The Chairman's Perspective on the Kadzukian Network.
And we're back on the Chairman's Perspective, powered by the Kadzukian Network. Wow, what an amazing show. Just the opportunity to be able to talk to two of the most prominent leaders in county government here in Mayor Lee Harris and, of course, the host of our show, Chairman Van Turner. It was just a great opportunity to get insight from the both of you at the same time.
It's county and it's people, and I think that we really are going to see Shelby County government at its best. And so you are listening to the Chairman's Perspective. I'm here with my co-host, Lee Eric Smith.
Just happy to be here.
And we are powered by the Kadzukian Network. We'll see you next time.
The Chairman's Perspective Podcast. Executive producer, Shelby County Commission's Van Turner. Hosted by Lee Eric Smith. Recorded at Kadzukian Studios. Directed, produced, and distributed by Kadzukian.